let's get into the gold standard, because one of the things that again surprised me about your book was just how much it was a recurring theme and how long the peg to gold lasted. I think it was in the early 1970s that finally the peg was done away with. Um, and I'll be honest with you, I had obviously heard of the gold standard, didn't know much about it. And probably the most I knew about it was Ron Paul, the Texas Republican who ran for president a couple of times, I think in 2008 and 2012, centered his campaign on a return to the gold standard, which I think a lot of modern economists looked at as a form of quackery. But that certainly made the topic return to the mainstream for a period of time there.
Yeah.
So what was the gold standard? What was I guess let's just leave the question open. What was the gold standard? What were its benefits and what were its drawbacks?
Okay, first, the gold standard was a British monetary institution. And so one thing that must be emphasized in discussing the gold standard was just how long, I think most people don't appreciate this, the United States, even after the American Revolution, even after the War of 1812, maintained this connection to the British Empire. What the gold standard did was it pegged the value of currencies at a set rate to a weight of gold. So it's an invariable monetary standard. You can't inflate the currency, you can't deflate it. It's consistent, it's unvarying, and it does not change. The benefits to the gold standard, such as that they existed, was that it created certainty and stability about the value of money relative to other goods. That arguably, I think in many instances did create confidence among the investor class. It made them confident that if they invested their money somewhere, or if they gave loans to someone or someone else, that the value of their loans wouldn't be ultimately inflated away because the monetary standard changed. The gold standard also created the first, I think, genuine era of financial globalization, because the gold standard was an international institution, so it allowed capital and credit to move more freely across national economies. And I mentioned the policy of resumption earlier. One of the reasons why Northern American capitalists wanted to go on the policy of resumption is that you had to be on the gold standard if you wanted access to British capital. So it did these things. The drawbacks to the gold standard were twofold. First, in creating an invariable monetary standard, it didn't give government the capacity to use monetary policy to determine the path of the economy. So if you needed to inflate the currency, if you needed to deflate perhaps, although the gold standard had a deflationary bias, you weren't able to do that. So it kind of limited government policy, especially it limited fiscal policy, because if you want to expand the fiscal capacity of the state, oftentimes that involves changing the value of the currency by inflating it. The second thing it did was, in creating international connection in terms of capital movements, it relayed financial panics. So if there were ever financial panics or financial crises in the era of the gold standard, it relayed those panics across the Atlantic. That happened in the Panic of 1873. It happened in the Panic of 1893, both of which led to crippling recessions, which the American government couldn't do anything about because it couldn't expand its fiscal resources because it was committed to the gold standard. And then, of course, most famously or infamously, it happened during the Great Depression. So I identify, like many scholars, the roots of the Great Depression of the 1930s in the functioning of the gold standard. The post-war period coming out of World War II is a little bit different. The gold standard suspended during the war, World War II, much like it had been in the Civil War, to expand the fiscal resources of states to fight the war. Coming out of World War II, it's really a dollar gold standard. So the rest of the world pegs itself to the dollar, and the dollar in turn is pegged to gold. I should have mentioned this earlier, sorry, so it's kind of backing up. But another aspect of the gold standard is that technically, you could exchange your currency for gold if you wanted to. It's free exchangeability. The post-World War II system didn't quite work that way. You could expand your currency for dollars if you had pounds or francs or lira, but not for gold. Maybe we'll come back to that when we get to kind of later parts of the book, but that's the broad outlines of the gold standard.
Thanks for watching this video clip of the Speak Good podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, please check out our full conversations on your favorite podcast directory. We've spoken with everyone from the Secretary of the Smithsonian Institution about what it was like to be the founding director of the National Museum of African American History and Culture, to a member of Congress who describes his day job as being in the wrestling ring, to an expert storyteller who helps us understand how we can use stories to help us achieve our business goals. Thanks for watching.